what drew me to poetry?
Yeah.
I don't know. I always really liked music. I played music for a long time. My first memory of poetry is sort of rewriting nursery rhymes, but with different words. So you could sort of hear the rhythm of like Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall or something like that, and replace it with Danniel went to the mall, something like that, you know. And that was a very like sort of, it sounds goofy and small, but it was sort of really powerful moment to realize you could use sound to say something different than what other people were saying. And so I think, yeah, that's partly it. I really like sound and movement with mouths and things like that. And I still sort of play drums to this day, which I think is the most rhythmic instrument probably. So that translates into a lot of scanning and stuff. And I also like that poets were sort of fringe and weird when I finally really started learning about poets. And a lot of them had done great things that people didn't necessarily know about, in the way that people knew about novelists or actors or things like that. As a poet, you could always be weird and powerful. You didn't have to be powerful and famous or something. No, not even famous. Like a lot of poets are famous, but you could be weird and like sort of outside the glass or something. And I liked that. Yeah.
Who are some of the poets you like that influenced you?
Well, my gateway drug poet was E.E. Cummings, I think. And that was one of those reading experiences where you, like everyone says this, where you read it, something and you go like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do this shit, or whatever. You know, and he was writing with a typewriter and would do these sort of snaking visual poems on the page. And that still, I think, carries over. Like, not a lot of poets really like to admit they have E.E. Cummings in their lineage anymore. I feel bad for him. He gets abandoned very quickly.
He sort of fell out of fashion.
Yeah, even for like undergrads are like, I'm done with him. He's not cool. Yeah. Anyone here an E.E. Cummings fan? No. See, no one. Yeah. You're not an undergrad though. Yeah. You're not an undergrad. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The poet who really blew my mind, and I still claim or whatever. Is probably William Carlos Williams. Just his project, I think, was really incredible to me. That he sort of, he was a doctor, could have chosen to go make doctor money in a lot of places, but he sort of chose to root himself in Paterson, New Jersey, which, if you ever go there, you'll understand why this was a very courageous, sacrificial event. It's just a kind of a rough town. And yeah, he just dedicated himself to writing about sort of like these beautiful vignettes of American life in this very sort of minimalist, imagist way. And Paterson has since become this kind of like poetry historical town, because like Ginsberg came out of there later, and Mary Baraka followed suit not too far behind. And so he put Paterson on the map, and I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, he's usually the first one that comes to mind when I'm talking about like early high school, when I started to take poetry seriously and knew it was something I wanted to do seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. How long were you writing until you started seeing like success and started to get like things published and started to really get from that?
Never. No, that's an interesting question. I mean, because how do you define that word? I think everybody has to define that word individually in some ways. The first time I wrote a poem, in some ways was a success. You know what I mean? The feeling of finishing something that's yours and that you wrote and it was something you wanted to say, I think is the first real moment in that. If you're talking about publications and books and things like that, that's all comes later and it's way less fun than it seems. Like the first time that happens is really cool, but then then the dream just slowly dies. Like it's like discovering a unicorn and then someone immediately shoots it with an arrow. Kind of, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, The really fun stuff still to this day is just like anytime you finish something and you really love it, I think is a greater feeling than any sort of accolade or publication or something. Like, you know, obviously it feels great to publish a book anytime it happens, and it's great to be in rooms where you can read to people. I love doing that stuff, but I'm against this idea that there's a moment where you like arrive or something. Like, I think you're always sort of going uphill against your own ambition in some ways, and I unfortunately have very steep ambitions for myself, so I'm still like, I want to say 11% up the mountain of what I hope to do, but sorry, that was a depressing answer to that question. But yeah, you have to determine it for yourself, I think, and sort of find like small ways to achieve success or whatever. Like I said, like I don't know if there's a better feeling than finishing a poem. And like I've written nonfiction, I've written essays and book reviews, and I'm writing a novel, and nothing feels the same way. Nothing feels as good as finishing a poem for whatever reason. Maybe I just like poetry more, but I think poetry is the most difficult thing to do. And when it all sort of clicks into place and all the registers sort of hit, I think that's probably the most successful I ever feel, and I feel a little high or something like off that. Yeah.
How long or how much work did it take you to hone your craft and get it really good? Like, you put there an hour, how much? Yeah, you put there an hour, and you just only work at it.
I think it evolves. I think, like, we have all these discussions in school, in poetry classes, about like finding your voice. And I think that's a little bit overrated of like an idea. Like, I think you need to find your work in some ways. Like, and I place a lot of stock in just sort of doing the work and working really hard and stuff. When it comes to, you know, sort of how you evolve as an artist, I think that's also a really interesting question for any artist, whether it's an actor or a musician or a director or a writer. Like, if you do one thing really well, do you just keep doing that your entire career? Or do you just, like, if you have one really good record, do you just record that record 10 times? Like, that's basically what Bob Dylan did, I feel like. But a lot of people are gonna get really mad that I say, he went electric or whatever, you know. But like, yeah. But he's basically just always been like the goatee guy with the guitar or whatever, you know. Like, he hasn't like really like broken his own mold. Or like Bruce Springsteen has been always doing Bruce Springsteen kind of. And like, I feel like I don't know, Brad Pitt is always just doing the same shit or whatever. Or do you like take different roles? Do you record experimental stuff? You know, like, and I think I'm a little bit more of the latter camp, where my first book feels very different from my second book, and I immediately wanted to write prose after I finished the second book, and just kind of always leap around and make yourself a little uncomfortable and just see what happens, and leave yourself open to massive failure in many ways, like, because you're only going to figure it out if you try it, you know what I mean? And who knows if you're great at writing prose instead of writing poetry, or vice versa, or if you're great at writing essays or book reviews. So I've always tried to sort of keep myself off tilt or off kilt, and just kind of never get comfortable in my own craft or anything like that. Always just sort of be like, you have more to do, things like that.
There's a question for...
Yes.
What are your thoughts on experimental poetry as compared to narrative poetry? Do you prefer one or the other?
I don't. I love them both equally. There's the painter Willem de Kooning has this great quote where he said, "Being anti-traditional is just as corny as being anti-experimental," which is to say, anyone who tells you one or the other is bad is corny and lame, and like, you don't have to be, you know, a guy or a gal who only believes in formal poetry, and you don't have to only be a guy or a gal who believes in obscure smoke and mirrors poetry. For me, I really like the weird space between the two of them, the friction between the two of them. Like, I feel like I write narrative poems that are experimental, and I write experimental poems that are narrative, sort of, and I don't ever want to be placed in either of those camps wholeheartedly. I think, and there's much more experimental poets than me, and there's much more narrative poets than me, and they write great work, and So anytime like I see these discourses going on, I'm always just kind of like, who cares? You know, like it's just make art, and if it's good art, that's great, and if it's bad, then you know everyone's gonna die, and we'll forget about it and stuff. And it's like.